everyone, it's Tox from critshappen.com. Thanks for watching and welcome back. We're here with another critical preview where we take a game that's about to be on Kickstarter, or in this case is already on Kickstarter, put it through its paces and let you know about our experiences while playing it. Normally we like to wear a Crits Happen t-shirt, but this time out we're wearing something a little retro. The designers of this game, Justin Waggle and Grey Wolf Games, have made some videos already and they wear some retro Atari shirts. So I thought it was a little fitting to wear something retro to do this critical preview in. Today we're going to look at a game called Lineage. This is by Grey Wolf Games and like I mentioned is already on Kickstarter. It's about maybe 35–40% of the way funded and it's something that I think is very unique. This is a game that first visually is quite stunning. It's very beautiful looking. In fact, this is probably the best prototype anyone has ever sent me. These tiles are hard plastic. They are solid. I mean, they got a little flex in them, but they are not really breakable at all. All the pieces are laser cut wood. Now, I do have to say, this is a prototype, so this is not indicative of the final product. But if this is how good their prototypes are, that bodes very well. This game is interesting because it is asymmetrical. It's built for 2 to 6 players, but when I say asymmetrical, it's very different from any type of board game I've played in this genre. It's deeply rooted in Chinese culture, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But to give you a background around who plays what, one player is going to be the Emperor and the General, and they're going to start on different ends of the board. The board is very modular. Not only are each of the tiles modular and shuffled each game and set up differently, each of these individual squares in between the tiles are shuffled and mixed up separately, and those will be revealed throughout the game. There's some standard basic setup which you can check on Grey Wolf's YouTube page. They actually have a couple of videos showing you how to set everything up. So there's a little bit of standardization in the center, but then everything else is completely modular. So if you want to set it up in a certain way, you can do that. If you want to go random, you can do that as well. And I think that that's a really cool thing. Now, when the other players are involved, while one player is playing the Emperor and the General, the other players have a matching student and master. The master has a plus sign and the student has a minus sign. And that's very important in terms of who you can push or pull in this game using a feature called magnetism. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But as you can see, we've got a full game set up right here. There are 4 different colored hexes that are part of the board. There are the winter lakes, there are the spring forests, there are the summer mountains, and there are the autumn marshes. Each one of those are going to interact in different times based on the cards that could be drawn up here. In addition, you have chi for several different colors. You have yellow earth chi, you have red fire chi, green wood chi, silver metal chi, and blue water chi. There is also this black chi. This is only accessible by the Emperor, and he's going to use that to block off certain pathways on the board, as well as to try and complete his objective in the game. The player who's playing the Emperor is supposed to get one of these black chi tokens on each of the 4 towns in the 4 corners of the board. If they can do that, they win the game. However, all of the other players playing their master and their apprentice are going to be traveling around the board, going to towns, going to palaces, and going to temples in the hopes of gaining 1 card from each stack that's here on the side that represents teachings of different animal styles of fighting. If they can obtain that, the students can obtain one of each of those cards and get back to the center with their master and with their lineage token, they win the game. It sounds complicated. It is at first because it is a very different design. But once you play a game or even 2, it starts to come together in how everything moves. So let's show you, after everything is set up, how some of the pieces interact with each other, how some of these cards impact the game, and what some of the moves the Emperor, the General, the Masters, and the students could take in this beautifully rendered Chinese culture game. So as we mentioned, this is a full setup of a 6-player game of Lineage. everyone who plays a master and a student has their master start on their colored temple. So red on red, silver on silver, and so forth. The game is randomized between the temples, which are the triangles, the palaces, which are the squares, and the towns, which are the circles. The palaces have a palace deck up here, which we'll talk about in a second. The temples have multiple purposes aside from just starting places. If a master ever loses their lineage marker, that is where the lineage marker goes back to. And in order to win the game as a master and student player, you have to be able to collect one of each of the cards on the left here, plus have your lineage marker and get back to the center. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. Now, the beginning of the game, each temple is flipped over. Each player has their piece put onto the temple. If less than 6 players are playing, all you do is leave the masters on their temples. So let's say we were playing a 5-player game and the red player wasn't playing. Their apprentice would come off, their student would come off, but their master stays on the board because it still is a spot that the other players who are playing the masters and students could go to train in one of the fighting styles as well. But in this case, we'll leave everybody on the board. The other 2 pieces that you need to know about are these yin and yang pieces. These are black and white tiles that are basically like pressure points. As someone stands on them, they are fine. The moment that someone leaves them, they are flipped over. And these are the most strategic piece inside of Lineage, I personally feel. Because what happens is, whenever you have the white and the black up, which is what the starting combination is, white for the Emperor, black for the General, when that is set up, you are good to go and can move any piece you want inside of the game. The moment that something leaves and these change, for example, we get black and black, from that point on, the player who plays the Emperor and the General can only move the General because he corresponds to the black. The players can only move their masters because they have their black squares on the bottom as well. So it's a great reminder, when these 2 squares are black and black, only black pieces can move. If they were to flip back to white and black, all can move. And if someone moves across them and flips them back to white and white, then only the white pieces can move. So in this scenario, only the Emperor and only the apprentices would be able to move. And that makes for a lot of really interesting combinations and movements inside of the game. Now, in addition to having all of the temples flipped face up, the final thing that is done before the game begins is each player takes their own color card and their lineage marker. So if I was the blue player, I would take the blue dragon card and place it in front of me, and I would take the D4, which is provided as a lineage marker. It does not matter what number it is on right now, but that would represent that I own and contain my lineage marker. All the other players have theirs, and the Emperor has his as well with a white lineage marker. Now those will be very important at the end of their turns, depending on what cards are face up and things like that. And then finally, the Emperor is allowed to flip over 5 hexagon tiles. And this is very important. While the Emperor and all the other pieces are allowed to move on hexagons and on towns, palaces, and temple squares, the only place that a general can walk on is a field. And a field is the flip side, which is orange. So if I wanted to go ahead and flip over 1, 2, 3, 4, let's get that one, and 5. I could flip those over and immediately have a pathway for the general to follow and walk on. So the general, when he moves, could move here or here or here, but he is never allowed to go onto the non-field hexagons. So if I had 3 movement points, let's say with the general, I could not move 1, 2, 3. I would have to move 1, 2, and 3. In addition to flipping those 5 tiles over, I'm also allowed to place 5 black chi markers on them. And this is a resource that is very important for the general and the emperor player. The goal of the Emperor and General is to get a black chi marker on each of the 4 towns on the 4 corners. Only the General can place a chi marker, and he can only place it onto a field or a town that he is able to get into. So for example, if I were taking my turn right now, I could move my general onto this field, onto this town, and then put a black chi marker here. Now as you'll notice, there's only so many chi markers. So as I put chi markers out on the board to block spaces, because now that these are blocked, the blue player, for example, could not move his master onto that hexagon. It's as though the player is recreating almost the Great Wall of China, so to speak. What happens is I'm limited in the number of black chi markers I'm going to have. So I'm not going to be able to block every single hexagon out here. I'm going to have to really strategically think about which hexagons I want to be able to block and which hexagons I want to be able to just turn into fields for my general to walk on. So a field that has no black stone on it could be moved onto from another player or from the general. But a field with a black stone on it can only be moved onto by a general and not by a regular player. That makes for some really interesting strategic decisions for the Emperor to make. It also means that the players are going to have to strategically figure out where and how they want to move around the board as well. When they move their tokens, their masters or their students, for example, in this configuration, if I'm the blue player, I very well may want to go over to this palace and discover what color it is and move over this way. But if that general gets over here and blocks off this tile, for example, I may end up stuck over there. And that could prove to be a big challenge for me with how I want to then get out and move my master around the board. The player to the left of the Emperor starts the game. Let's say in this game it's the red player with the tiger and his lineage marker. He's in a really good setup because he has the master and his temple very close to the center where his apprentices start. In fact, if the Emperor had been thinking, he might have actually wanted to block off these 3 tiles to stop that from happening. Instead, he's blocked off the yellow player, which is okay because again, you're not going to be able to block everyone every game. Now, each piece can move 3 spaces, and a space is either a hexagon or one of these wooden tiles. So a player could go 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3, any combination like that. The only tiles that are unable to be moved across are the north, south, east, and west tiles that are around this center marker. So if I want to, for my very first move as a red player, I could immediately move 1, 2 with my apprentice and visit my master at the temple. And this is very important. Now in this case, my student is visiting the master at the temple. It wouldn't make a difference if they were visiting at the temple or if they were visiting at a different space. As long as the 2 matching colors are together on the same space, then that student receives training from the master. What would happen is the player would look at these stacks of cards and take the corresponding colors. Now these are shuffled, but the top cards are always going to be the same. And there's 1 of each color. So in this case, the red player would take the red 3 tiger. His goal is to get a card from the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 stack. So once he has a 3, he's not going to get another 3. But now you'll notice that the blue dragon has a 2 and a 3 up. So the first player that goes to the blue master is going to get 2 cards. They would get all of the cards corresponding with that color. So while it's really good for the red player because he obtained a card really quickly, it also opens up options for the other players with master and students as their pieces to potentially gain other pieces. Whenever a player finishes their turn on one of the towns or palaces that are face down, they flip them face up. In this case, we have a yellow palace. This is one of the fun things that the players that are using the masters and students have to be able to do throughout the game, is visit these different towns and palaces and flip them over to discover what color they are. And there's a big reason for that. We have not talked about the cards at the top of the game board yet. Let's get a little bit into this because these are very important. These pieces, these cards represent 3 different things. The first represents the seasons. So this is the spring forest, and it always starts the game on top. What this means is during this round, spring forests are not able to be walked on by players. At the beginning of the blue player's turn, he's going to move, and he must move his characters. They're not allowed to stay on the same spot. So let's go back to where he was and think about how these cards are going to impact his decisions. The first thing that's going to happen is he can try and move his blue apprentice to get closer to his master. But uh-oh, he looks and he sees the Emperor's blocked my path here, so my master can't move onto this space, and the spring forests are inaccessible this turn. That means that this piece can no longer move. And if an Emperor is able to block off a master piece, then that master comes back to the center, and the player is going to lose their lineage marker, and it goes back on their temple. They can reclaim it by getting back to the temple, but it becomes very challenging. Now, this is very important because if you block a master, not only do they lose their lineage marker, but they lose their lineage cards that they may have collected, and they forfeit the rest of their turn. So blocking from the Emperor and the General becomes a very strategic point in time, depending on where a master is and what they have in their possession. Now, if a player has his master reach their temple, they can take back their lineage marker. Now, you may be asking yourself, why are the lineage markers important? Well, the lineage markers are very important. At the end of every turn that a player has moved their Emperor or their master token, they roll their lineage marker. So the red player went first. When he was done with his turn, he would roll his lineage marker, and in this case get a 2. He would get corresponding chi, 2 red chi, fire chi. The Emperor is going to gain chi based on a specific card that is going to be face up. So you'll see here we have, at the beginning of each round, a top card from this deck will be turned over, and we have wood chi. So at the end of the Emperor's turn, he would roll his die, and he would get whatever wood chi he rolled. The Emperor is going to constantly shift. The players are going to get their own color. Now, they can obtain other colors by going to towns and palaces with corresponding colors of what they need to get. Chi is very important because chi can be spent to push and pull characters based on magnetism. We'll talk about that in a second. It can be used to move extra spaces, 1 chi per space. It can also be used to reclaim towns and areas. So as the general is running around placing black chi on fields and onto towns, players can use 5 chi of any one color to be able to reclaim those towns or reclaim those fields. And while they may have 5 chi of their own specific type, they must actually use the chi that is corresponding to the top color. So one of the things players can do at the beginning of their turn is actually transmute chi. They can take 2 of any one color and transmute it into 1 of any other color. So if along the way the red player had collected 4 chi that were green wood chi, and he had these 2 red chi, at the beginning of his turn, if he knew he wanted to use 5 wood chi to do something, he could transmute these 2 into 1 green and be able to affect something on the board. And that's really the basis of what Lineage is all about. It is about going around as a player, whether you're the apprentice and students, and discovering the board, learning what pieces are going to help you get what chi and interact and affect the Emperor's strategy, because it's part going out and training and part avoiding and kind of blocking and countering what the Emperor does. The Emperor has an even more challenging job because they're playing against all the other players and their strategies as well. The starting setup of 5 tokens or 5 hexagons that the Emperor can choose is tremendous because he gets to choose that after the board is all set up, and he can see exactly what is going to benefit him to start off from a strategy and a pathway for that general. Now, the final thing we haven't talked about are how the Emperor moves and how the magnetism works. The Emperor is really cool. The Emperor moves 3 spaces just like everyone else. He would move 1, 2, 3, for example. Every hexagon that he crosses, he is allowed to flip over and turn into a field, which, again, remember, the general can only walk on field spaces. The last space that he finishes on, he's allowed to place a black token on there. So that would block this space from being accessed by any of the players, which is really nice. There are games where the Emperor turns over quite a bit of the spaces, and there's good and bad associated with that. So for example, we were talking before about how the spring forests were inaccessible. Well, that's bad if you're the blue player and the way his turn started off. But if the Emperor's running around and turning everything over, there's not going to be any spring, summer, autumn, or winter tiles. So you could actually open up the board, because again, you're only going to have a limited number of black chi to be able to place on the board. So if you turn over too many tiles, you're going to open up movement for other players. You're also going to open up your movement for your general, but it's a risk you're going to have to take. Now, the pushing and the pulling, the magnetism of the game, this is a very interesting concept that has been put into this as well. The magnetism allows players to push and pull different players of opposing forces. So you'll notice at the beginning of the game we talked about this. The masters have a plus sign and the apprentices have a minus sign. The Emperor is a 0. He is like negative, like nothing can impact him at all. But the General has a plus sign as well. And just like magnetism works, plus and plus will push off of each other. So if the General is here and the green player is here, the plus and the plus can push off of each other. Minuses and minuses can push off of each other. And plus and minuses can attract to each other. Now, why is that important? Well, the first thing to note is to make any kind of push or pull attempt, you need to be able to spend 5 pieces of the same color chi associated with the chi that is on top of the chi deck and be able to push or pull the correct characters. If there are more than one character, like let's say you had 2 students and 1 general and you were trying to push them, let's say I want to move the general here and push these guys this way or this way, I would have to spend 5 chi per person I wanted to move. So that can get really expensive. But the right push or the right pull at the right time can make a drastic difference to blocking certain characters or conscripting certain characters. We haven't talked about that, and I'm not going to get into too many deep rules because there are a few more rules involved, but there is a way for the Emperor and the General to conscript a student and turn them on their side and allow the Emperor to exact his will on that student and use them on his turn instead of the player's turn, which is really interesting. In addition, the palaces and the palace cards allow players the opportunity to take those fields that the Emperor and General are using and creating and possibly turn them back to their seasonal versions. Lineage is a game of control, movement, philosophy, and magnetism. It is beautifully rendered, as you can see just from this beta and prototype right here. But its asynchronous style offers players very different types of gameplay and offers a lot of replay as well, whether you're playing as the Masters and the Apprentices or whether you're playing as the Emperor or flip-flopping between those. So that's Lineage. The first thing I will say is Lineage is not a game for every type of player. This is a very different style game, and I think while I believe that the theme and the artwork and the components are beautiful, it's not going to be something that everyone jumps on top of. But that said, for those people who are interested in Chinese philosophy or Chinese culture, or people who love Go, for example, will love this game. This is a very different style board game than most people are used to playing. The asynchronous feeling of it is very different, whether you're playing a 2, a 3, or 6 player game. I think it's really cool that if you're not playing with the maximum number of 6 players, let's say you're only playing with 3 players, where one person was the green master and student, one person was the yellow master and student, and then the other player was the Emperor and the General. The other 3, the blue, the silver, and the red masters, they are still on the board. Their student tokens come off the board, but they are still part of the board and part of the temples. They don't move, unlike if you're actually playing those pieces, you can move the masters around. So it makes it actually a little more challenging even if you are playing with less players, because with 6 players or 5 players, everyone's moving their masters around, and there's a little bit of cooperativeness between the players playing the masters and students to make sure that they position their masters in a way that the students can get to them and train in the different styles. So that's very interesting, because when you're only playing with like 2 players as master and student and 1 player as the Emperor and the General, there's a lot less of the masters moving around and a lot more of the students moving around to go to each of those temples. which offers different strategies for the Emperor and General player as well, because they're going to block things differently. That's a lot of what the Emperor and General does. Aside from just creating the pathways for the General to walk on, the Emperor and the General are going to work together to really block off these students. And in some cases, because everything can be put out randomly at the beginning of the game, we've had some games where it's been very easy to block people off, and some games where it's very challenging to block people off. So we've really enjoyed that as well. Overall, this is a different style board game than most people may be used to, but one that if it appeals to what your likes or dislikes may be, this is something that could really be a lot of fun for you. We have found it to be a little challenging to teach the new players, but it's more of a game that you learn while playing it than actually reading through the rules. I will tell you right now that if you download the rules the way they are right now, they're still a little rough and they are working on them. We've talked to Grey Wolf Games about that, and they said they are going to be making some improvements based on some of the feedback they've gotten from backers already on the project and from other reviewers that have taken a look at the game as well, which is really good. They seem really connected to the community and wanting to listen to what the fans are talking about, so that's a really good thing. At the end of the day, I've enjoyed my time with Lineage. I think it is a different adventure that a lot of people will enjoy going on if this is their type of thing. I like the asynchronous style of it. I like playing as the Emperor and General personally a little more. It gives you a little bit more of a combative feeling of trying to block people off, whereas the apprentices or the students and the masters have a little bit more of a kind of a gathering and a set collecting feel to it. But it's neat and it's interesting and it's different. I also like the fact that what we talked about before, these cards change every round, and the chi that you use is going to change every round. So every game really does feel very different. You can plan and you can plot and you can make a strategy, but as these things change, you're going to have to adjust your strategy to what kind of chi maybe you want to transmute, what kind of chi you don't, you want to save for another turn, how you're going to use that chi, if you're going to push and pull people, if you're going to use it to move a little further. There's just a lot of different choices, but not so many that you're put in a position where you don't know what to do because there's so many options available to you. There are a few good options and you have to make the best choices to what you want to do for that turn and then the next few turns. So that is Lineage. We would love to hear your thoughts as well. Have you already backed this, and if so, why and what did you like? If you haven't seen it before, what do you think of this critical preview? Feel free to leave your comments below in the YouTube channel. Of course, you can find us online at Facebook, Twitter, and Google Plus by searching Crits Happen, or at our homepage at critshappen.com. But until we see you next time, we hope you enjoy all of your times inside the Chinese philosophy world of Lineage. Thanks so much for watching. Keep rolling those dice, and we hope they're all crits.